Well, hello, everybody. My name is Kaylee Paray-Shaughnessy, and I'm the director of the Whittier Birthplace Museum. Welcome to our December 2021 lecture within our virtual lecture series. I'm so excited to have Dr. William Hamilton of Black Birch Farm Apiaries with us tonight to talk about some history of beekeeping and some beekeeping practices, if anybody is interested in getting some of their own hives. Dr. Hamilton is also going to have some of his hives at the Whittier Birthplace with us next year. We are very excited to have some bees back on the property. You may or may not know that Thomas Whittier, the first of the Whittier family to live on our property and the one who built our house, was also the first person to bring honeybees to Haverhill. So we got some history, we've got some bees, and we're very excited. So take it away, Dr. Hamilton.
Hi, happy to be here. I am the owner and operator of Black Birch Farm that you see on your screen there. And I'm also a professor. I teach geomathematics. I've been a beekeeper over 50 years. And like I say, we run the farm. It's a honeybee phenology research station. We have fairly elaborate weather instrumentation. And we're constantly doing research as to how the weather affects the pollen, the honey flow, and the bees themselves. Of course, being a farm, we have lots of critters, horses, the cats, the dogs, the goats, and again, lots of meteorologic equipment. You can see the meteorology equipment here. You can see some of the hives in the back. And at the end, we'll give you our website. If you log on to the website, you can always get the latest weather information at the farm. We collect data, standard meteorologic data. We also have soil moisture, leaf wetness, evaporation processes. So if you're interested in the weather, you can all get it for free at the website. And of course, we do lots of beekeeping. We have a big 9-foot bear outside the farm. We sell the honey right out the front door in a self-serve. We call it the honey hut. It's a heated box. It has lots of honey in it, self-serve. It's 365. And apparently we've become a landmark. The police were telling people the other day, well, where you see the bear, then you take your next right. So we've arrived, so to speak. Beekeeping, people always think of beekeeping as a summer sort of endeavor. And in fact, the most important time is during the winter. And, so if you're thinking about being a beekeeper, it's not just during the good weather, it's also during the storms, and you have to be able to get out to the hives. These hives here are what we call nukes. These are used to raise queens. You can see that they're right next to a paddock. We have horses here. One of the misnomers is that bees and horses don't really get along, but they don't really bother one another. In terms of beekeeping, well, first thing we like to tell people is that it's about the bees. It's not about the honey. Here's a swarm. Here's some hives of my hives, and here's a swarm that was issued out of them. And people always are very, obviously they love the honey. I always tell people the story. So you become a beekeeper and you have a good year, maybe you'll get 50 to 75 pounds of honey. And so you bottle it and you give it away for Christmas gifts, and everyone says thank you. And the next year, maybe you'll get 100 pounds of honey. And you bottle it and give it away for Christmas gifts. And the people that you give it away to haven't eaten the honey that you gave them last year. So the problem is, what do you do with the honey? So as long as you take care of the bees, you'll have more than enough honey. History of beekeeping, well, it's been around. We have found honey, capped honey in the tombs of the queens in Egypt. That's perfectly good. Honey, once it's capped, really never goes bad. It's a great hobby. People have been doing it for literally thousands of years. We see petroglyphs of this is how people used to get their sugar. They'd climb a tree and get stung and get the honey. Dating all the way back to 7000 BC. Bees in amber, fossilized bees, from all over the world. History, this is what hive bees look like in their natural state. This is called a gum tree. So if we look at the United States, The first hives were brought in to Newbury, which is where Whittier got his bees. Whittier went over and got bees out of Newbury, and actually the hives in Newbury eventually failed. Brought over here. The first extractor to make liquefied honey, person by the name of Peabody in Boston invented the first honey extractor. The first lawsuit for bees was in Danvers, Massachusetts, where someone bought some land, and on the land there was a gum tree, and the person that sold him the land said, I sold you the land, but the gum trees are mine. And of course, that didn't fly very well, because this is how you did get your sugar. So they went to court, and the court found that no, you sold the property. The trees were the person that you sold the property to. But this is what comb looks like in its natural state. And if you want to gather honey, usually the combs on the end are what had the honey. The combs in the inner side had the brood. They were used for egg laying. And people would just go up, and if you're very quiet and you use a little smoke, you could just pull one of these off and walk away with probably not getting stung. Here we see colonies. If you go over to Europe, this is a Roman apiary, but almost any of the castles, you see these outer holes which held bee skeps. And this is where they kept their bees. And if they were being attacked, they would run out the door, and the skeps had handles on them, and they would throw the skeps at the invading army. And each skep had about 60,000 bees in it. So it wouldn't take very many to disrupt sort of the oncoming force. This is a skep. This is probably what Whittier kept his bees in. We actually keep bees in one of these just for historical reasons. And if you tip it over, there's the comb, and the honey would be in these outer edges. And again, you could literally on a sunny day with your bare hands very slowly go in here and pull these out, shake the bees off, and probably not get stung. In the US, we had in the middle 1800s, is very interesting. The people that made the advances in beekeeping were usually priests, and a Reverend Lorenzo Lorraine Langstroth discovered how to keep bees with movable frames. Until this time, what you saw were what we call fixed comb. The bees built the comb and it was fixed. And Langstroth figured out how this concept of bee space, which is about 5/8 of an inch, where if you put frames in and you space them, you could pull them out and manipulate the hive. And people, everyone kept wooden boxes. You can see the boxes are all different shapes and sizes, and they had these frames in them, and they kept bees. And this is where you got your sugar. Until we actually went to sugar cane, processed sugar, this is what people did. Everyone had 1 or 2 hives. And again, any box would do. And in the 1860s, when they moved to movable frame hives, there were these great discussions about what size the box should be, so on and so forth. And you can see here's a farmer, 1930s circa, and okay, he just threw some boxes together, his little openings for the bees to go in and out of, and they would do the same thing. They would go in and take the honey out. What's surplus honey? Well, any honey that the bee didn't use. And it used to be that we didn't harvest honey until the spring. We would let the bees keep the honey all winter long. If they ate it all, so be it. Whatever was left in the spring, we would take out. And then around, the 1940s, 1950s, we saw reversed it, and we started taking the honey away. We started playing a guessing game with the bees. We tried to estimate how much honey they would need, and we would take the honey out in the fall. Today, because of monoagriculture, big aggie, most farms do not keep bees. They concentrate on what they're growing, and they hire migratory beekeepers. Here's a guy with each one of these hives has probably got around 40,000 bees in it. They're stacked up on pallets, and you can see them smoking them down. They'll throw a net over this. In the spring, you'll see them coming up from the Cape, having pollinated the cranberry crop, and they're on their way up to Maine to pollinate the blueberry crop. You'll see them on 495 in the spring, and then they'll turn around and start heading down south for pollination. And occasionally this is a problem. So it tips over. You're never going to get these bees back into the box. This is a real nightmare when this happens. What'll happen is they'll call local beekeepers, and what they'll do is they'll find the queens, they'll put them in boxes, and they simply give the bees away to the local yokel, so to speak, to clean up the mess. They should never be moved at night, although they move them during the day. It's a real stress point for bees, migratory beekeeping, but we're not going back. The genie's out of the bottle. We're not going back to the old days of sort of multi-agriculture. So migratory beekeeping is here to stay. It's one of the reasons why we have so many diseases with bees, but we can't get people to sort of go back to keeping hives on their own property.
Bill, can I stop you there just for
Sure.
a moment? I know that Jay is having a hard time seeing the slides. Oh, he got it. Okay, never mind.
Okay.
Is anybody else having difficulty seeing the slides on the screen? Sheila or Art? I'll take the silence as a no. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you, everybody.
Along the major riverways, the Mississippi, the Susquehanna, the Ohio, the Platte, the Missouri, the Columbia, people will put bees on barges, and they'll simply go up and down to the agricultural lands. And they, again, a form of migratory beekeeping. They move up and down the river throughout the year with the bees. And actually around the world, this is actually a more common way of migratory beekeeping than putting them on flatbed trucks and moving them around. Here's sort of the monoculture. You can see here, these pallets. These may not be the same person's hives. Now, the problem that we have in the United States right away is we used to have 6 million hives. We're down to around 1 million. We don't even have enough bees to pollinate the almond crop, the one crop in California, because of the diseases and the mites that are starting to attack the bees. So we really need to have more beekeepers. We need to have more young beekeepers. I hate to be an age person, but you know, I'm 70 and I go to meetings. Sometimes I'm the youngest one there. We need to get more young people involved into agriculture, and especially beekeeping. And the problem with this is if this group of hives has a disease, within 48 hours, all these hives will have the disease. And this is what's causing some of the problems in American beekeeping. Same thing here. You know, you can see here, bees are bearding on the hives. They're warm. And again, if one of these is diseased, within 48 hours, they'll all be diseased. And what will happen is, once they pollinate, the people will take these hives and move them somewhere else, and they'll be mixed with other people's hives. And so we have this spreading going on. If you look at beekeeping across the United States, the pollen is their protein and the nectar is their carbohydrate. And so the limiting factor for bees is the pollen, not the nectar. The more pollen they get, the more robust the hive is. And the trick with, and we're not really that bad at it. In New England, we have a high plant diversity. We have truck farms that grow lots of different plants. We're not really into super mono agriculture. I've kept bees in the Midwest and out in Oregon. And in the Midwest in particular, they're very much into a mono agriculture environment. And therefore, they don't have the plant diversity. And they have greater problems with beekeeping than we do here. With us, it's simply the amount of land available for pollen and for beekeeping. Bees, a lot of people don't realize honeybees are not native to the United States. They had to be brought over. There's not a honeybee here that is native. They were all brought over from Eastern Europe and Western Europe. Because they had no predators here when they were brought over, they simply took over. And honeybees are unique relative to other pollinators in that when they find a source of good pollen, they go back and tell the rest of the hive, and the whole hive will go out and pollinate that particular crop, which makes them economically viable for American agriculture. About $40 billion worth of crop is pollinated by honeybees. And they're unique because they will go after one plant source at a time because they talk to one another. We have lots of different types. These are the carnolians. These are the dark bees. These bees do well here. They overwinter very well. The Caucasian, which we don't use very much, these have very long tongues. They compete with butterflies for nectar. They winter well. This is the one that most people use. This is the Italian, called a five-banded Italian. It's a very light bee. It's very, very gentle. It builds up very, very quickly. The problem with these guys is they have a tendency to rob from one another in the fall. So people will have two hives and they'll go out and one hive is dead. And what happened? Well, the hive next to it literally went in and took everything away from the other hive. The stronger hive worked. Today, these are hybridized with the carnolians. And in fact, in our apiaries, we're slowly switching to pure carnolians because they don't rob and they overwinter very, very well. In the last 2 decades, we've brought in Russian bees to try and improve the stock. Russian bees overwinter very well. They just don't really produce a good honey crop. If we look at bees in a hive, we have 3 different members. The ones that you see out in the field all the time are the workers, which are females. Okay, the queen is a female, obviously, and most of the bees in the hive are females. An unfertilized egg will turn into a drone, a male. Now, the drone has no stinger and his head is almost entirely eye. And this is because the queen, when a queen is created, the virgin queen will go on a mating flight. They do not mate in the hive. They mate in a drone congregation area where there's literally thousands of drones competing to mate with this one queen. She'll mate 13 to 20 times. And that's the last time she'll fly back to the hive and she'll never leave the hive again. She will lay between 1,500 and 2,000 eggs a day. Fertilized eggs become the workers, unfertilized become the drones. During the summer, in the height of a honey flow, the worker bees will last about 21 to 28 days. That's it. And they're constantly being replaced. Interestingly enough, around August, the bees change their enzymatic profile. Bees are very unique. They can change their physical structure and their enzymatic profile in 24 hours. So in August, they change into winter bees and they'll last 4 to 5 months. During the summer, they change into these, very harried workers that last only about 21 days to sometimes 5 weeks. You can see the queen is huge. These are the worker bees. This is the queen. You can see how large her thorax is. So she has in her mating flight stored enough sperm to lay 2,000 eggs a day throughout the summer and fertilize them. And she will last, again, in the old days of beekeeping, in the 50s and 60s, she would last 3 or 4 years. Today, because of inbreeding or what have you, we're lucky if she lasts 2 years. She controls the hive with pheromones that she exudes primarily from the base of her feet. Her stinger does not have barbs. Interestingly enough, when a queen begins to fail, her daughters notice that she's beginning to fail, and they will raise new queens. And when the first queen comes out, they will raise anywhere from 6 to a dozen queens. When the first queen hatches, she will go around and she will kill all the other queen cells so that she's the only one in the hive. So I have a Game of Thrones thing going on there. Interestingly enough, they will not sting humans. I have raised hundreds of queens and never stung by a queen bee. The worker bees are the ones that will sting you. The drones, here's a drone over here. You can see its head is all eyes. These are the really noisy bees. They make a really loud buzzing sound. And they have no stinger. So, you know, one of the cool things you can do with drones is hold them in your hand and never be afraid of getting stung by them. They're sexually mature in 2 weeks. They do have more than one function in life. We used to think that they only mated with the queen, but they do give off chemicals that control the hive. In the winter, you'll see the females dragging them out of the hive, throwing them out of the hive, because they do eat up honey and they serve no purpose in the winter. Life cycle, well, a queen can be developed in 16 days, a worker in 21 days, and a drone in 24. And it's important that the queen be developed in 16 days. If a hive should lose a queen, they need to develop one very quickly. Otherwise, they lose the egg laying capacity and their numbers dwindle very, very quickly. So they can raise a queen exceptionally quickly. And as soon as she goes on a mating flight, normally she'll start laying eggs around the 25th day. So in less than a month, the hive can be up and running again if they lose a queen. If you look at the brood chamber itself, these are the eggs. And as you move towards the center of the hive, you can see that the eggs begin to pupate, and the worker bees exude an enzyme which feeds the bees. And so on about the 4th day, they fill this cell up with this enzyme and then they cap it. And in 21 days, a fully functional bee pops out. And that bee, its first job is actually to do this, is to feed eggs, this enzymatic, what we call bee bread, this enzyme that will nourish them into a bee. This is what the capped brood looks like. It's all of a buff color. You can see this one is almost ready to be capped. These are going to be filled with this enzyme. Once it's filled, it's a capped, and they pupate into a bee. Here's a cutaway section. Here's an egg, and you can see them pupating. You can see that they're filled with the eye, they're developed. And again, in 21 days, they chew their way out and they're ready to go. This is what a brood frame looks like. It's capped as about 7,000 cells. In the dead of summer, when things are really headed, there's no empty cells on this frame. Each side, you've got 14,000 bees that are going to pop out. These bullet-shaped cells, these are drone cells. These are the males. They lay the males down here, and the rest will be full of female worker bees. Again, when the queen fails, they develop these queen cells. Now, interestingly enough, they will take an egg that would normally turn into a worker bee. They put it in this queen cell and they change the enzymatic fluid. And by changing the contents, the chemistry of the enzymatic fluid, it will turn that egg into a queen bee rather than a worker bee. And again, they will develop about 6 of these. The first queen that comes out will run around and she will sting all the other ones before they can hatch. There's actually a trap door here. It's just sort of interesting. You never know she left the hive. It pops open, she leaves, it swings back. You sort of have to look inside to tell whether or not there's one inside there or not. Jobs, well, first 12 days, they're nurse bees. They clean the hive, they feed the brood. 10 to 20 days, they're comb building. If bees die in the hive, they carry them out immediately. The honey, in order to be US grade A, has to be less than 18% humidity. So the bees will actually fan the hive to evaporate the water out of the nectar to turn it into honey. They know when it's less than 18%, they cap it. When it's capped, it is below an 18%. They build the comb, they secrete wax, they accept pollen and nectar from the foragers. They then become house guard bees. And guard bees, if you go to the front of the hive and you take your finger and you move it across the hive, you'll see these bees run across with your finger. Those are the guard bees. And they're checking, the only bees allowed into the hive are bees from that hive. They don't want robbers coming in. And then once they're through guard bees, they become the field bees. The bees that you see out in the field are the oldest bees. They die in the field. If you look at them real close, you'll find that their wings are tattered. Eventually they fly and they just can't get back to the hive. They die out in the field. It takes about 1 million bee flights to produce 1 pound of honey. So there's a lot of activity going on. We saw a look at the biology of the bee. Well, it's sort of interesting. They've got lots of eyes. They've got these compound eyes, but they have these ocellus eye on the top of the head. The antennae are very complex, respond to touch and odor. Mandibles, they will tear in the spring. For us, we're very lucky. We have swamp maples. Just about the times they need high quality pollen, the swamp maple, it may not have opened, but it's got the pollen. They'll go up and tear the bud open and take the pollen out of the swamp maple. They have this tri-proboscis, one's long, saw these other sheaths that go around it. And so they can get into a pretty deep flower, unlike bumblebees that don't have a really long proboscis. They see things in ultraviolet. So to us, we see this. To the bee, most of the plants give them a landing pattern. They actually tell the bee where the nectar is. Pollen baskets, again, what the bee does, you can see it's covered in pollen. It's gathering pollen and it's packing it into these hairs on its hind legs, which it's going to carry back to the hive. But of course, it's jumping from plant to plant, and simply it's covered in pollen simply by walking from one plant, flying from one plant, then walking around on the next one. It's cross-pollinating the plants. The pollen, again, is its limiting nutrient. The more pollen it gets, the stronger the hive is going to be. The Nasonov gland, when we open a hive, if they put their butts up in the air and start fanning, they're telling everyone that there's an intruder. This is used to tell them where honey is, where nectar is, and when they're being invaded. When we look at a hive, it's really simple. They're not that expensive. They're just boxes with these movable frames in them. And so we have the first 2 boxes are where they're going to be living. This is their brood chamber. We put a queen excluder on, which is a welded wired a feature where the workers can get through, but the queen can't. The queen's so big she can't get through here. And the workers will store honey up here. This is the honey we harvest. It has an inner cover and an outer cover, all wood, wax. I should say all wood. In the modern era, they do make these out of all plastic. I don't know why. Bees don't live in plastic, but they do make them all plastic. The bees like the wood. The foundation is wax, a wax foundation that they draw out and they store the honey in. Our biggest problem today are the Varroa mites. This is the Varroa destructor. It's actually a tick. It's the #1 threat to beekeeping. And I should say that every generation of beekeeper had a threat. In the glory days of beekeeping, which were from 1860 to around 1958, we had the wax moth, which we have today. but it would go in and tunnel through the wax. The maggot that pupated would tunnel through the wax, and it was going to destroy beekeeping. We found that if we kept the combs frozen, we could defeat the wax, and eventually they came up with a product that it didn't contaminate the wax, but kept the wax moth away. Today, for us, it's the Varroa destructor for modern beekeeping. It can be seen with the naked eye. It's about the size of the head of a pin. If you have bees, you have this. It is so prevalent that if you have a hive, you have the Varroa destructor in it. This is what it looks like. It's a tick that's on the bee, and it's insidious. What it does is just before the bees cap the pupated bee, the female runs in and she literally attaches herself to the pupae, and they cap her inside here. And inside, she generates 3 females and 1 male. And she mates with that male in here, all while this bee is pupating. So the bee is born with the tick on it. And the ticks are passed along as the bees walk around with one another. And you can see, here's one with the ticks on them. And again, the life cycle is she goes in here and she, just before they're capped, she runs in and she lives off the bee as it's pupating. The bee is born with the ticks, and then the bee, as it moves around, the ticks will jump to other bees. See, this is a high infestation here. The problem with the mite, we can control the mite, but it carries with it 7 different viruses that unfortunately weaken the bee. This is called the K wing. This is called the Israeli Kashmir virus. It bends the wings so the bee can't fly. It reduces the fly activity of the bee. It causes a weight loss. It reduces the lifespan. Hemoglyph is their blood. It reduces their blood volume. And if there's enough on them, it actually changes the skeleton of the bee. The bee has a hard time walking and flying. And the big problem is virus transmissions. And we all know the problem with viruses with COVID. And so far, the bee labs, we have 4 bee labs in the United States, they have no solution to the virus. So the only solution we have at this point is to try and keep the mite population down. And we do that by using organics. We use formic acid, which is found in honey. And the amount of formic acid we use to get rid of the mites, you get 300 or 400 times that amount eating 1 carrot. So we use a very small amount of formic. We use 2 acids, formic acid and oxalic acid. Oxalic acid is what gives rhubarb its sour taste. So both of these, the bees tolerate very well, but the mites don't. Unfortunately, the protocol for putting the formic acid into the hive is a high work activity kind of thing. So in the old days, when I was keeping bees in Oregon, I would go out and visit bees maybe 12 times a year. Today, I have to be out every 14 days in the hive. And in order to get the amount of honey that I got with 30 hives, I need 100 hives today. So it's a much more labor-intensive protocol than it was even 30 years ago. In terms of us, well, we run a bee school. We found that the only way to get beekeepers knowledgeable that they don't kill their bees is a bee school. We run 9 courses. The first one is a Zoom course. All the others are held at the farm. We're unique in that we run courses throughout the year just when you need to know what to do. And we actually use our hives to learn. We are the only bee school that does that. You come in, you have your veils and your gloves on, and we teach you all these different things in the bee school. Our web address is blackbirchfarmapiaries.com. If you go there, again, you can get all the weather information for the local area. If you're interested, we have newsletters, and if you're interested in taking courses of becoming a beekeeper, you can sign up for the courses as well. We have lots and lots of people visit the website simply because they're interested in the amount of rain they got last night or the amount of snow that fell. There is rather extensive meteorologic information. Is there any questions I can answer about bees or beekeeping? Anyone interested in what they might do? The big thing that we ask people to do today is to plant pollinator plants, which there are many. If you go to University of New Hampshire, the UNH site, and type in pollinator plants, they have great information about pollinator plants that exist, and they're natives. They're not exotics. They're natives that are easy to grow. And so we sort of encourage people to, you don't have to have a whole garden of pollinator plants, but put some pollinator plants around your house. They're easy keepers if they're the natives, if they're not the exotics. We do have people that plant extensive pollinator gardens with exotics and natives. And you'll be surprised the number of pollinators you'll get when you plant. You'll get bats, you'll get butterflies, there are over 300 kinds of bees in Massachusetts alone. You will get most of them visiting your gardens. They're fascinating to watch. Questions from anyone?
I got a question, Bill. Yep.
Sure.
I know the mites are dangerous to the bees. Are there other predators that are looking for bees, other insects or birds that become predators of the bees?
Well, we do have, we do have other things, viruses or bacteria, but we've got a handle on that. American foul brood almost wiped out the bees in the late 1800s. The federal government started the bee inspector program over that, and every county has a bee inspector. And they go around, they are allowed to come on your property without notice and inspect your hives. Now, most of them will come on, knock on your door and say, "Hi, I'm the bee inspector. I'd like to look at you." And they're looking for American foul brood. American foul brood, you burn everything. There's no cure to it. You burn the hive, you burn all the equipment. Fortunately, we've got a good handle on it with education and the inspectors. And there are some other bacterial diseases, but we have cures for those. If that's why we encourage people to take the classes. A big part of the classes is noticing if there's something wrong with the hive and what's wrong with it and what to do before the diseases get out of hand. Our problem today, we have two major problems today in Massachusetts. The bears are back. Okay, I have. Not that far from Whittier, I have a bee yard that was visited by bears. I had to put a bear fence up. I've had 2 yards visited by bears. We've had to put bear fence up. And the other thing is interestingly enough, it's unfortunate, we now can put GPSs in the hives because hives get stolen. You go to a bee yard and the hive is gone. Essex Aggie had 6 hives. They have a new bee inspector, and she's very educated oriented, and they put 6 hives at Essex Aggie. They came in one day and all 6 hives were gone. Those are our 2 big issues. Fortunately, I haven't had any hives stolen, but I have had bears, and when bears get through with the hive, if you go on my website, there's actually a video. We actually caught a bear with a game camera. And he would come back he was a little 2-year-old male. He would come back every 2 hours, knock a hive over, push the frames out, sit there and eat, have a great time for himself, go away, come back 2 hours later, knock another hive over, get his full of honey. And, he spread the hives out over about 40 or 50 feet. they are really slobs at eating honey, the bears. They have a good time, but they're not neat at it. So now those are the two really big things that we saw have issues with in Massachusetts. The rest we saw have got a handle on. The mites, they're going to be with us until we get a silver bullet. We're hoping the bee labs come up with something relatively soon. They're working away at it. Hopefully they'll find out something that works. Any other questions? Well, I've enjoyed speaking with you tonight. If you have any questions, feel free to go to the website. We have a place that you can contact us, ask questions. We're always more than happy to answer questions. And again, we'll have a couple hives at the Whittier Birthplace here in April or May, whenever the weather allows us to get out there. We'll have some hives. We're not going to really advertise them. We like people to stay away from them, but they'll be out there working away. All right, Kaylee, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you so much. I just wanted to let everyone know that we will be continuing our virtual lecture series in the new year. In January, our speaker is author Larry Glatz, who recently wrote a book about John Greenleaf Whittier's brother, Matthew Franklin Whittier, and he'll be speaking over Zoom with us again on January 27th. I'll put the link in the chat for that to sign up, but it's whittierbirthplace.org/events. And I hope you will all join us again. Any final words or questions?
Fran has a question. Go ahead, Fran.
It was a very interesting talk. When you were describing the different types of bees, the Italian bee, a Russian bee, etc., was that based on the origins of where those bees came from originally?
Yes, right. The Caucasian bees came from the Caucasus Mountains. The Italian bees came from northern Italy, not southern Italy, but northern Italy. Yeah.
So the Russian bees, if you recall the Chernobyl accident.
Yep.
It was my understanding that it decimated the bees.
In that area, yes, it did. I mean, the USSR is a huge place, and that particular bee is spread throughout the Soviet Union. And it's an interesting bee in that it's designed to live in that cold, harsh environment. It builds up very, very quickly when there's a honey flow, and then the numbers decrease very quickly so that it has lots of stores. It doesn't keep a lot of bees around. It seems to know when to stop laying eggs, so that it has the exact proper number of bee. Here in the United States, we have a breeding program for them. We actually breed them here. But most beekeepers aren't adept enough at their beekeeping to have the numbers explode suddenly and then drop down very quickly. They're used to having a different kind of biology bee. So it takes a little bit of learning. They're also a little bit more aggressive, a bee. And people are so used to having the Italian bee, which is a very gentle bee. I mean, literally on a sunny day, I can take their hive totally apart, pull every frame out, lay it on the ground, and they don't care. Russian bees, not the case. You open them up and they're saying hello to you. They're like, what are you doing in our hive? So, people like to have gentle bees. The thing is that the gene that controls the honey collection also controls the aggressive nature of the bee. The more aggressive the bee, the more honey they collect. So it's sort of a trade-off there as to what you want to do.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, if there are no other questions, I hope everyone has a good holiday and a safe holiday.
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
Thank you so much.
You bet.
Haley.
All right. I'll
Good
be
Good
signing
night,
off.
everyone.
Take care.
Okay, thank you, Bill.
You bet. Take care, everyone.
Very good.